Today we're diving into the hardest part of a methanol system setup, and that is the wiring. As you can see, we have plenty to work with, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage, and as always I want to take a moment to thank all the new subscribers out there, everybody who's liking the content and participating through the comments down below. And as always, a huge shout out to Snow Performance Nitrous Express for sponsoring this build. We are installing the Snow Performance Stage 4 Boost Cooler, which is just the top of the line methanol injection kit out there. The cool thing about this is you can do all kinds of neat things off of both RPM and pressure, but that requires some wiring. For one, we have to tie into both the cam sensor and the manifold air pressure sensor to get those signals back to the unit. This unit we're going to go ahead and mount in the cab of the truck, probably up underneath the dash on the passenger side. So what we also need to do is get all of the wiring from the inside to the engine bay. We've got a couple big harnesses here. One of them is going to be the main power harness that comes back to the controller itself. The other one is going to be the power harness that controls the pump. And the nice thing about this unit is it has some GPIO on it, which is basically general purpose IO. That's what it means. We're going to use those for a couple different things. One of them is going to be the active. I've got an LED installed from a previous kit. We're going to tie that back. It comes with one. Comes with two actually. Comes with the green to let you know when you're injecting. Also comes with an orange to let you know whenever you have a fault like low fluid or anything else. That's also can be used to trigger something like a boost controller or a timing limiter to cut timing or boost. So GPIO1 is going to be the active injection active right now. We'll tie that to our green light, and we're also going to tie it back to our solenoid instead of running our solenoid off of our pump lead, which you can do both, but it's generally a better idea to hit that solenoid with full voltage. And so we're going to go ahead and use the intended purpose of the IO in this case. The other one, as I said, we will bring back to the amber or red LED for whenever we're in fault mode. And we may look somewhere down the road of tying in a solenoid valve that will vent pressure to the bypass valve for the Pro Charger that would effectively open the bypass up, allow boost pressure to bleed off. That way, if we went into fault mode, we could actually keep from over boosting the truck, running lean, things like that. So keep your eyes peeled in a later date. If you haven't subscribed already, subscribe, because we're going to be doing some cool stuff around this kit and around the Super Auto, since it is Pro Charged again, but with a much bigger supercharger this time. We're getting ready. Once we finish this up, we're going to start tuning. So you don't want to miss out on doing things like the map tuning, speed density tuning, timing, torque, all that fun stuff. That being said, we're going to dive into the wiring diagram. It's pretty straightforward, but some of the things that we need to keep in mind here is we've got two GPIOs. That's pretty straightforward. We have the brown wire, which is our sensor coming back from the float switch. That is a ground loop, so we'll tie one of the leads that came from the float switch to a ground, bring the other one into the brown wire on here. Whenever that ground is made or whenever the circuit is closed, we'll know that the tank is low. Some of the other stuff we have, you can get a snow map sensor if you don't want to tie into your map sensor. I'm going to go ahead and tie into the map sensor. We'll be using the blue and black wire in that situation. So we are tying the black wire to the common ground that the map sensor is using, and then we will use the blue wire to tie into the signal. Make sure you look up the wiring diagram for your map sensor. It's going to have three wires: power, ground, and signal. We're only utilizing power and our ground and signal. So get that right. It'll be the same situation for the cam sensor. You could use the crank sensor if you want to. Cam sensor is easier to get to. So we're going to tie into the cam sensor. Same ordeal. We'll be using two wires. In this case, we will be using, actually, we're just taking the signal off of that one. So we're using the yellow wire to get our cam signal back into the unit. Then we will set it up in the unit to make sure that the RPMs match what we're seeing on the cluster or through our tuning software. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. We've got orange, which is our ignition lead that lets us know whenever the key is on. We'll tie that into our ignition fuse box that we already have. The pump lead, or the controller leads itself, will go to a strong ground on it, and then red will go directly to the battery with the included 40 amp fuse. Where is it? There it is, 40 amp fuse holder. As always, I'm going to be using solderless, uninsulated butt splices, and then I will come back and put heat shrink over the top of them. I'm going to wrap up the entire loom, including our power wires, pull these into the engine bay, and then have a nice clean loom, except for the wires that I need for maybe the LED. I will break those out in particular, but then I'll run the rest of the wires through the loom for the LEDs also, because I want to be able to tie in, as I said, the solenoid and possibly the air solenoid for actuating the wastegate, or bypass valve in this situation. I'm going to get started on that. I will catch you up as we move forward. Okay, I've got my looms kind of laid out here, and the way this thing's going to mount, I'm going to want to eventually tie these together into one loom, but first I'm going to go ahead and loom this section out here. So I'll take some wire loom here, cut a section down to length that I kind of like. Where's my scissors? And then I'm also going to feed a piece of heat shrink tube over that. Whew. They give you plenty of wire in which to run this, so it shouldn't be an issue. Okay, now that I've got my first section done here, I'm going to go ahead and heat shrink up my connection. My joint where the sheath meets our heat shrink towards the end of our connection. Make sure it doesn't fray, keep it in place. Make everything look nice and clean. Give it that professional install look. Perfect. So after we do this, we've got a lot of wire. We're going to bring another section of nylon insulation here, nylon wire sheath, and we're going to end up covering up, and we'll do the same thing on this side, but we want to leave a little bit more room because eventually we're going to tie into these for our LEDs. But for now, we're going to go ahead and kind of eyeball out our measurements for how far we need to go into the truck. We'll leave a couple feet on the end loose, and then we will go ahead and throw some loom on the next section of our wires. Okay, well, we weren't able to get the heat shrink over both looms down here, so I used my second favorite trick of using a little bit of hockey stick tape to make a clean, nice connection on there. I went ahead and shrunk the heat shrink that I already had down there to hold the wires nice together. This will be kind of our mount inside the car, good and clean. On the other side though, we were able to get the heat shrink over it. Little tip, if your loom is starting to separate, go ahead and take some tape, electrical tape or something, wrap it around there just once so you can feed your heat shrink over it, heat shrink it up, and man, look how nice that is. And we've got plenty of flying lead out here to get to everything that we want to do. Now we've got to feed this harness from the inside of the car to the engine bay. In order to do that, let's go ahead and unhook everything so we're not dealing with this end device here floating, flopping around. And we'll start with this side inside the car from where we kind of want to mount it, and then we will feed this through any kind of firewall grommets, things like that. There's actually a nice little spot that goes through the side panel into the doorway that doesn't get obstructed with anything. The only thing that you'll see on this setup is a little bit of wire loom sticking through there, and it sticks it out right beside the battery. So we should have a decent amount of excess on here. May have left it a little bit too long. I probably should have loomed it down about a foot shorter, but I'd rather have it a little bit too long than too short, obviously. I don't know if you're even going to be able to see any of this, but basically we've got a hole that goes through the fender into the engine bay right there. And then we've got a hole down here that comes from inside the kick panel area underneath the dash that we can run our wires up through. And then whenever we're done, we will mount the controller underneath here somewhere. And that'll also give us close access to our center console, because in our center console is where I've got my USB hub, where I have all my other USB controllable devices hooked up. So I can hit everything by only plugging into one USB on the truck. My HP tuners, my programmable gauges, and now, well, my methanol controller. feeding wire is going to be probably one of the most difficult things that you do, especially on modern vehicles, because the newer the vehicle is, the more stuff that there is in the way. And so what we've done here is we've actually fed from the middle. Sometimes it's easier to feed a wire from the engine bay back into the cab or vice versa and use that as a pull wire. I've got a pull wire that I actually fed from inside the door crease here, where I'm going to route our harness, and then I used one of these. It's a, you know, the reachy thing with the claw on the end of it. You can pick one of these things up off of Amazon from your local auto parts store. If you do not have one of these already, this is probably the best $10, $15 that you could ever spend whenever it comes to doing wiring. This helps to do dash pulls, helps to do just across the engine bay pulls, helps to get down in the engine. It's better you know, than about anything else at helping you do wiring. And it's also great for grabbing that occasional thing that you drop in the engine bay, etc. But I've got my full wire through now. I'm going to go ahead and try and pull my harness through. Whenever we do that, we want to go ahead and tape it up nice and secure. Take your pull wire, wrap it around a couple times. You can even take it and do a standard knot around your harness that you're pulling through, then tape up that knot, and that gives it some tension. And on top of it, if you have to, you can knot it up a few times. That's an old trick for pulling electrical wire that we use in the commercial or industrial space. And so I'm going to put about 2 knots on this and then tape up the whole thing, pull it through, hopefully in one clean pull, where I feed it from the inside, pull a little bit, feed, pull, rinse and repeat until we get all the way into the engine bay. Okay, we got it pulled from the glove box to the engine bay. It's kind of hard to focus, but you can see it right back in there. Let's let the focus pick back up. That is right behind the hinge. It just comes out and it goes right up into that fender space. Come on, focus back up for me. There it is. Nice, clean. And then in the glove box here, we've got our excess. Let me zoom out. Sorry, guys. Okay, then in our glove box, we got the excess, and we'll probably have to notch a spot in the glove box in the back corner to make sure it doesn't bind on the harness whenever it closes. But we've got plenty of excess in here so we can mount our controller nice and cleanly in the glove box. And then let's go look in the engine bay. Okay, here's our finished section outside of the engine bay. As I said, we were a little bit long on our loom. We could have done it about a foot shorter and it'd been about perfect, but we can kind of just set it in like this, and we have plenty of length to go to our pump down here. We've got auxiliary power already waiting here in case we got a couple leads for auxiliary power. Then the other ones go over to our cutoff wiring that I had pre-wired that would go to the bypass valve. So we'll go ahead and hook those up while we're at it. And then the rest of it's going to be, here's our fuel level sender. We'll bring that in, tie that in right next to our harness. And then our solenoid wiring's right here. And our pump wiring's right down there. So everything's nice and contained in a small area. We've got a nice professional looking wire loom into the engine bay. We'll be able to cut this back, and then we'll loom out individual sections of this into the different things like the pump. We'll tie into our power, and then we'll go about mounting our controller in the glove box. Okay, I wanted to take a moment to stop while I was working on the map sensor. I've got the 3-bar map sensor here. Unfortunately, it does not have the pinout on it. Luckily, I still had my 1-bar that does have the pinout showing what is our ground and what is our voltage out. Those are the two that we're looking for. Ground is going to be our black wire that goes back to our controller, and then our blue wire will be our voltage out. Basically, what I've done is I've come back, stripped it back some, put splices on the connector side, and then I'm going to strip these wires back, connect them together with the harness side, and splice them all together, heat shrink it up, and then we should be good to go. I'm not going to get to the cam sensor because it's behind the water pump right now, so we won't have RPMs initially, but there's a good chance that there's somewhere on the ECM that is outputting the RPM to the gauge cluster. I'll have to double check the documentation on that. If that is the case, we should be able to pick up that pulse signal and bring it into the Methanol controller and then calibrate off of that. Not the end of the world, because our primary trigger for methanol injection on this is going to be boost anyways, but there's some cool things that you can do with the ramp rate with boost and RPM that I would like to dig into eventually. Just can't get to it right now. So I have been working on all this mess over here. Let me kind of pan up so you can see what I'm talking about. There's the mess that's going on. I've been looming everything, so everything's got nylon wire loom around it. Everywhere that's going, these are my last couple of spares. I'm about done. These are a couple spares here. Got my solenoid hooked up, got my pump hooked up down here, and it's kind of zip tied in. As I'm going through, I'm routing everything beforehand, taking measurements, cutting my loom back, running my loom and heat shrink off, and I've got everything coming back to my primary loom, which I've zip tied up out of the way here. And then I'm just kind of zip tying things as I get them done to get them out of the way. We're going to have a couple extra spares on here that we will just kind of probably tape up or something out of the way, or we may loom it up and then loop it and hide it up underneath here to get it out of the way. So take your time. This process takes the longest. It's the most tedious. You know, measure twice, cut once. That's always a good thing to do in this kind of setup. And, you know, double check any kind of connections that you have. Do pull test if you're using butt splices, the like. Make sure that you have good solid connections so you don't have to go back and do anything over again. So I'm going to get back to it. We'll do a wrap up as soon as I get done knocking this wiring out, doing an overview of everything that we've done for the wiring side of things. Okay, so we're done. And by done, I mean we're to the point where we can inject methanol. We've got everything wired up. We've got our solenoid, our pump, our map sensor. We've got our main harness, power, fuse. We're tied into the auxiliary fuse box over there that keys on at ignition. So both the solenoid is tied in on that, and then we get the ground from the controller. So we're sending power from our auxiliary fuse block over there. And then the turn-on signal that goes to the controller, which is in the glove box right now, comes from that also, and it's tied back into our main harness. We've got our spares kind of tucked out of the way there. As I said, we will tie in the RPM one eventually, and then we've got to get some diodes so we can tie back our warning and injection light. Those are pretty important, so that's something that I'm going to get ordered on today, but we will do a follow-up video whenever we set that part up, along with the RPM sensor off the ECM. Hopefully I'm going to have to do some digging on the ECM pinout to see what kind of signal we're getting on that. But 99% of this kit is now installed, and in fact we could go out, plug the laptop in, get it set up, and start injecting methanol and running boost. But before we do that, we're going to have to mix some methanol. Okay, it's nice and dark in here, but I got my light. Here you can see our controller in the glove box. Look how nice it turned out with everything loomed up. As I said, the glove box won't close with this loom going behind it. Most likely what I'll do is either run the loom out the side and mount this up underneath, or maybe just notch this glove box, because I'll be honest, this is the work truck, so it's the plastic trim. I can buy one of these glove boxes off of eBay for about 20 bucks out of a wrecked truck, so I'm not really worried about tearing this thing up. So it may just be easier to notch it out, so we can go ahead and just mount this thing in here. Nice and clean. We'll use some double-sided tape or some Velcro to get it secured in there, and then we can close the glove box. I tell you what, everything's plugged in. Let's go ahead and turn the key on. And we've got a status light, so I don't know if you can see it there. We've got power to the unit. It's ready for programming. Okay, so that's the electrical side of it. And I'll be honest, it can be a little bit intimidating whenever you first look at it, but it's really not that complicated. If you look at the wiring diagram, which I have right here, there's not that much going on whenever you boil it all down. We just need to figure out what exactly that we're working with. There's spare wires in there that don't do anything, as I said, so whenever you initially take a glance, you think, man, that is a lot of wiring that's going on. At the end of the day, it's pretty straightforward. We've got a level switches coming back in. We've got power, then power to the pump. We've got a couple I/O that power things like the LED, boost cut, and our solenoid if we have one installed. And then we're just tying into the map sensor, or if you get the snow map sensor, you can do it that way. It wasn't that hard to go ahead and tie into the factory one. We'll see how it works on that. Should be great. That way, the actual unit is seeing the same pressure that the ECM is, so they're in sync. I'll be honest with you, I could have shot a video about doing every one of these steps, but I spent 4 hours doing this. That's because I went through and loomed and heat shrinked every single harness, breakout harness. The main harness came into the engine bay. From there, I heat shrinked it and then split out all of my different circuits where they're going, measured them all out, loomed those, heat shrink those. Every connection I use uninsulated butt splices with heat shrink over those. So, you know, this is a permanent just perfection level install. And I normally don't go that OCD on wiring, but I decided this time that I was going to step it up to the next level because a kit this nice deserves a wiring install that nice. So as I said, instead of showing you 4 hours of me just doing little things, I tried to touch on some of the highlights and some of the things that I had as far as issues that I ran into along the way. If you have any questions though, by all means hit up the comments down below. I will get back to you. This is kind of my bread and butter, is doing electrical and electronics and things like that. So let me know if you run into any roadblocks. At the same time though, you can give the guys over at Snow Performance a call. They're more than willing to help you out. So there are links down to their website below and Nitrous Express. So make sure and check those out. Support those that support the garage. I appreciate you taking the time. We are going to be into mixing methanol next, and then after that we're straight into tuning. So keep your eyes peeled. Once again, if you haven't subscribed, make sure and subscribe. You don't want to miss the big tuning process where we tune our awesome Pro Charge Silverado with the Snow Boost Cooler Stage 4 kit. You know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage. ABT, always be tuning.